Why don't we get started right on time? And Katie, why don't you go get us started by introducing Alvaro and Juan Felipe to the cohort? Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. I am very excited to have two colleagues in El Sistema from my experience in both Venezuela and in the United States. Juan Felipe Molano and I first met in California a few years ago at one of the very early Take a Stand conferences, which is a national gathering and youth performance that the Los Angeles Philharmonic has put on biannually for the last couple of years, and always featuring the student musicians of their El Sistema inspired program, the Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles. And Juan Felipe is a newer conductor with Yola. He is also the former national director of orchestras at the Batuta Colombian System of Youth Orchestras. And as part of our conversation today, I wanted his voice and his story to help shape how El Sistema began in Venezuela and then began its migration across the Americas and then into the United States. Alvaro is a friend who was my fellow in Los Fellows, which was the first year of the Abreu Fellowship that was created after the founder of El Sistema, Maestro Jose Antonio Abreu, won the TED Prize in 2009. Alvaro and I were part of a cohort of 10 musicians and administrators and young leaders who were selected from across the United States to attend a training program at the New England Conservatory and then spend an immersive month and a half in Venezuela, working in núcleos in Caracas and all over the country. Alvaro also has extensive experience in El Sistema in Guatemala. He's from Guatemala. He's former principal percussionist with the Guatemala National Symphony and has been a leader, an administrator, and coordinator in helping El Sistema be replicated in Guatemala. So from these two perspectives, I wanted to share how El Sistema began in Venezuela, do a brief introduction to the beginnings of El Sistema for those of you who are less familiar with this global movement of music for social change, and then walk us through how El Sistema first began to be replicated across the Americas and then eventually into the United States. There's a little bit about us. So I want to bring us back to the concept of collective impact. I am exploring, and I think our movements are aligning in the United States, of the El Sistema movement of music for social change, the fact that arts education is being taken out of the public school system dramatically and falling on the hands and shoulders. Weird.
Huh. Can you share your screen?
Yeah.
Please?
Oh, yeah, I thought I was. It says I can click stop showing screen. And then when I click show screen, it looks like it's showing a screen, but it's not.
Right now, you're not, but give me 1 second. I will.
Okay.
1 second. Now you should get a notification asking you to share your screen.
I'm just going to do the main screen. I was doing a PowerPoint screen, but now it's just the main screen. Is that helpful?
Can you see there we go. Yes, we can see it.
I can. Okay, great. So just wanted to take us back to the example of collective impact and uniting the El Sistema movement worldwide, particularly in the United States. We're in public schools. Arts education is being taken out of the public schools and being put on the shoulders of arts nonprofits and separate organizations to provide an arts experience for all kids, particularly kids who would not otherwise have the opportunity unless they were to experience it in an El Sistema program or nonprofit arts program, or in a public school setting where it is only very rarely offered at this point. The El Sistema movement shares many of the principles of collective impact in bringing together a group of agencies that have a common agenda, are tracking progress towards a common goal, are offering activities that are mutually reinforcing, provide an open and honest communication system, both amongst partner agencies and from the constituents who are participating in El Sistema programs. So that student voice and youth voice and parent voice and teacher voice is a core component of what an El Sistema program offers and does. And both collective impact organizations and the El Sistema movement essentially provide a backbone organization to a system of nucleos in any country where the El Sistema overhead is present. So in Venezuela, Maestro Abreu is featured here in this photo. He's in the center of the photo with kids in a nucleo. Maestro began the El Sistema movement in 1975. There are a number of myths related to a parking garage and 12 disciples essentially taking the message and Maestro Abreu's passion for music for all across the country. And those myths are both true and a big part of the underpinning story and ethos of the El Sistema movement. We're going to explore how Maestro Abreu came from a small gathering like this to a major national youth orchestra like this, led by Gustavo Dudamel, to movies and documentaries and TED Prizes and international film festivals and essentially international fame. You know, Gustavo Dudamel, who is one of the most famous graduates of the El Sistema program, being Time Magazine's Person of the Year. El Sistema has come a long way since its founding, and we'll explore how it started in Venezuela briefly and then move on to its expansion in the Americas and in the United States. Maestro Abreu founded El Sistema in reaction to a political and economic and artistic crisis in his country, and was reacting to an opportunity to flip on its head the idea of an elitist approach to classical music and music in general in Venezuela. He began in a parking garage by setting up music stands and instruments and invited youth from the community to come and participate in his very first youth orchestra rehearsal. He had relationships with some young musicians there and teachers who were already practicing in conservatories and schools in Caracas. And so in summary, and in a very brief overview, this was both a combination of kind of grassroots outreach plus very targeted invitations to inviting the right people to be there at the right time to be able to start this movement with a bang. Maestro Abreu really pushed the spread of El Sistema through a passionate and strict adherence to the core principles that have survived over time in the El Sistema system of youth orchestras, bands, and choirs. El Sistema began as an orchestra movement, and then as the question of access and opportunity continued to expand as El Sistema matured over time, it began to include choirs, musical ensembles and choirs and orchestras and bands for children with physical and mental disabilities. It began to include youth in prison. It began to include youth from very remote parts of the country. The level of access as El Sistema matured in Venezuela expanded over time and continues to evolve and expand, always thinking about new populations of youth that could be positively impacted by high-level music education and this experience in an El Sistema program. I'm going to review the principles that have survived, but I just want to make everyone aware and kind of put in your mind to think about that the principles of El Sistema were not codified in the way that I have codified these principles. And when I say I have, I mean I, for this presentation, have codified these principles, which are what the first class of Abreu Fellows and Eric Booth came up with in thinking about how to name the core concepts that needed to be in place in order for a replication of El Sistema to survive over time and across geographies and economies and situations and people, and could be replicated to lead towards the same outcomes of success that Venezuelans were experiencing with the El Sistema movement in their country. El Sistema, when it began, Maestro Abreu put a lot of effort into growing government support in order to systematize programming and nationwide access to this system of youth orchestras. And it has since, over the course of many presidents, grown exponentially in Venezuela. I know that we're all aware of the difficulty that Venezuela is going through now with its current government and economic situation, and government support has also significantly changed for El Sistema in Venezuela. But in looking at the history, it's just important for us to know that the government over time and private foundations and individuals essentially doubled down because of the results that they were seeing from this music and music for social change and youth empowerment program. And I, as the executive director of El Sistema USA, certainly intend to do all that I can with our relationships to keep that movement going. Here are the guiding principles of El Sistema in Venezuela as they were defined by Eric Booth, who you met as one of the module directors in the first class of Abreu Fellows, in which Alvaro and I were members. First, above all, is that in beginning your youth music program, it's got to have a mission of social change. You've got to be reaching kids who would not otherwise have access to this opportunity, and it has to be teaching and performing at a very high level of performance excellence. The Núcleo environment is a major component of any Sistema program, which is that students come together in a single location in a safe place where they are teaching, rehearsing, performing in chamber ensembles, in orchestras, in private lesson settings. In this Núcleo, it often is a community shared space so that it is a common gathering point for members of the community and obviously the El Sistema Orchestra. We're looking at an intensity of practice, both in the hours put in on your instrument and in rehearsal and over time, so that it is a pipeline of activities so that kids have the opportunity to enter very young and continue all the way through a semi-professional and actual professional career. Almost all El Sistema programs use the ensemble as a mechanism for a social construct of creating music together and contributing to something bigger than oneself together. Maestro Abreu famously describes the orchestra as a model for community and a model for society. The CATS teacher model is that teachers and practitioners of El Sistema are both active citizens in their communities, in that they participate, they care, they contribute, they give back, they vote, they get involved in their communities. They are artists in that they're creators. They are teachers in the giving back of their knowledge to the El Sistema Núcleo and community locally. And they're scholars in that they are always learning, so always pursuing advancement in their own knowledge of their expertise and work, and on behalf of their students as well. The multi-year continuum I mentioned, all the way, this pipeline of opportunities all the way through professionalism. Parent and community inclusion, a major component of what defines El Sistema inspired programs, and also that it doesn't end at the Núcleo. So the Núcleo is the impetus and essentially the pulse through which students and families can then gain access to other networks of social capital where they have previously been not included. And ambition and achievement, that this is not just for fun, that this is all about instilling in participating students the value of hard work and accomplishment, and setting a bar at the highest level and challenging students to reach that bar with love and support and a positive environment in which to accomplish that. So I want to kind of save questions for the end. So please, keep in mind any questions about the beginnings of El Sistema in Venezuela. And I want to introduce Juan Felipe, who is going to describe his experience in being introduced to El Sistema in Venezuela and in Colombia, and how it grew from Venezuela into Colombia, his role in it, and the issues that Batuta is thinking about and working through now as a result of its growth.
Thank you, Katie. So hi everyone, it's such a pleasure to get to meet you just from this side. I guess I know some of you at some point. I've known at some point. My name is Juan Felipe Molano. I am right now working for the LA field as the Yola conductor, and I also have the opportunity to go back and forth still between professional and youth orchestras. And when Katie just mentioned about having this opportunity to talk about Batuta's history and how much this has been replicated in different South American countries, it was a big pleasure and opportunity for me also to get to know you. I really want to hear some of your comments, questions at some point at the end. But if at some point you find somebody just has some specific question, Pedro mentioned, you just activate your camera, and that means like hand up if you have a specific question, something that we can solve in a very efficient way. If that's a longer thing, we can just postpone that for the end. But I'm very happy to respond to any specific question anyone has at some point. When I started in Batuta in 1991, we had different organizations running either youth orchestras or band, like wind bands across the whole country, as well as choirs. So, and what Batuta wanted at that point was first to consolidate a group of different orchestras, choirs, wind bands throughout the whole country. And El Sistema in Venezuela was very generous and was a very important organization for us when we started that. And I'm saying at that point I was just a student, so I just got to play the first national orchestra. At that point I was playing a clarinet, and that start was very important because first we were inspired by Venezuela, how they first try to to start orchestras from scratch, but at the same time also gathering things that were happening at the same time. And I think Batuta at the very beginning not even was interested to create new nucleus, but only to gather the existing ones. After a couple of years, Batuta did start to build a music program that actually at this point has over 40,000 students, I would assume so. But in general, just counting the different programs that are aligned with Batuta, that has a different source of funds, but at the same time that have differences with Batuta's beliefs, but they do belong to the El Sistema in Colombia. We count more than 120,000 students all along in Colombia. But I just want to reinforce this idea that it's not just one program, and it just happens to work there in Colombia, because every country, even every city, develops the program that makes more sense for them in terms of the social, political structure that we have. In Colombia, we have this combination where government funds with private ones make a good fit, sometimes 50-50, but sometimes it's just like around different amounts. what actually in Venezuela was only from the government, and some other programs like Sinfonía por el Perú. In Peru, they only have private ones. So this actually, geographically, we are actually between connecting South and Central America, and that makes somehow also a combination of um, different structures that actually at this point work very well, having the government participating not just in the funding part, but also even at the board level, board members level, but every time having a very important participation of the different private sectors, private companies, and that was developed in different ways. But I just want to focus right now in the curriculum. So the curriculum originally was completely trying to get the Venezuelan version in Colombia. And at some point we found out, yes, the culture, the fonts, even the musical heritage is different. However, we're so close and we share so much from the culture from that part of Venezuela and the two states that actually are at the border. But we have some other different realities at the Andes region, and of course at the Pacific region. So then at some point we started to adapt all the core values, all the great ideas that Venezuela were just giving us and sharing with us, with a lot of teachers that just came over to Colombia to try to teach and teach teachers. And at some point Colombia developed such a nice combination of those core values with the things that really made sense for those regions. And in terms of the music, that was something that was very enriching, having one very good word. We knew that works well. Let's say 1812 Overture by Tchaikovsky. That's a piece that we keep hearing. And that's one of those core pieces that we revisit, but added to some other pieces that really made sense for that region. That in terms of the musical component. In terms of fonts, as I said, the history showed us, and it's still showing us somehow, that marriage, a combination of the government funds and the private ones, gives some individuality, gives also some enrichedness. I mean, it's so enriching to see how much the private sector brings what they are good at. When we do fundraising events, they are very good at that. And then we have also the support from the government or the government agencies, which gives attendance. So if you bring a mayor, if you bring a governor, you have everyone on board. But at the same time, you have also the private sector saying, yes, but we also need to secure first the accountability, but definitely also the long-term process. And that's something that I think some projects have been growing very positively in securing first that the program is not something that runs until the government lasts, because as we know, we change, the administration changes. If that's a local government, it changes every 2 years. If that's the state, it changes every 3 years. But if that's the national government in Colombia, it's every 4 years. But it just varies in every country. My point is, we didn't want to have those projects last as long as the governments go. And that's something I learned also from Maestro Abreu. Many times I had the opportunity to talk to him. He also mentioned how many times he has to convince the different administrations about the importance and about the social change that the program was giving to the communities. And we assumed that actually it was something that it was done since day one, but actually Maestro Abreu kept saying that to us in Colombia. Many times you have to reinforce that day by day. So you have to convince and reconvince all different administrators and definitely the private sector. On that note, I want just to also mention the case of different countries like Peru, Brazil, Argentina has been different. And to put this in perspective, actually the El Sistema youth or the youth orchestras, it did start in Venezuela with these principles, with these major and big numbers. But we had previous experiences in Chile, even in Spain, with the wind band system. I mean, the system of youth wind bands. We actually had a bigger one related with wind bands than orchestras before 1991, when Batuta started working on these collaborations. And I just want to reinforce this because when Batuta started, we were forced to lead something that nobody asked us to lead. Um, just in terms of small organizations running youth orchestras in different cities saying, hey, but yeah, we exist. So the main reason was, okay, let's just gather them all. Let's provide some opportunities that are only able to be provided if we work as a network. And that's something that I think we all agree, the more we team efforts, the bigger outcomes and results we can get. But that took a little while. Some organizations were resistant because, okay, we are getting some funds from the government. If we gather together, we might lose them, because all those funds can go to these joint orchestra, the side-by-side orchestra that has been maybe one of the biggest outcomes from the El Sistema in Colombia. It's we call them representative orchestras, are these side-by-side orchestras that gather either orchestras from the same region, from the same city, or different ones. Just yesterday, so like 2 days ago, I was just having one of them with students from Brazil, Peru, and Colombia, and different cities in Colombia, having a concert where we just gather for a week. We have different rehearsals, different kind of rehearsals, sectionals, full orchestra rehearsals, and then we gather at the end for a full big concert. And that was something that I guess also came from Maestro Abreu. He said always, you have to have a result. You have to show a very clear outcome at the end of the process. And I would say it took us a while to understand that, because we thought, okay, we are doing a very nice social work. The kids are playing nice. They are having a lot of fun. But at the very end, if the concert is not so, if the outcome is not so clear, when you can see, hey, this really sounds like an orchestra. We are playing from regional composers or national composers to international composers, then you can really measure those outcomes. Again, there are a lot of surveys, there are a lot of researchers, and we can find those results by different means. But what is just undeniable is when a concert takes place, the students, the kids are just completely engaged, and they feel they've overcame all different challenges, and the audience is excited about it. So I think that's the key for success there, just like having final results, very clear final results. And the opportunity I've had also to visit different El Sistema orchestras in different places, even in Asia, that I've been also coming quite often during the last 3 years, it has convinced me that and also the question we place for all students about if this El Sistema movement is, we can apply that to different countries. That was one of the questions. Maybe you can rephrase it better, Katie, but it was like phrasing the applicability of this system of orchestras in Venezuela is possible in different places. I would say yes, but what has worked very nicely in Colombia and many different places that I've seen is how much you can adapt all those core values to the reality of its individual place. The more we look for the uniqueness of our society, of our small community in a very small village or in a national basis, the better chances we have to succeed. I don't know if there is any specific question what I've just talked about. Yes, Katie.
In thinking about the local nucleos and their relationship to a larger national system, How do people describe that experience? I think many of our fellows, the global fellows on the line, are either working in a local organization or are considering starting something new. What is it like for Nucleo directors and teachers, and you even as a conductor, to weave that kind of hyper-local and community-focused work while trying to stay in the loop and stay connected to a larger national system?
Yes, I think that the best option, or the best idea, to just get connected in a small base, in a small circle, but at the same time to feel that you belong to a bigger organization, it's the teacher seminarios. So this is something that we've done there many times, and I've done also many other places, but it's just the place where you can gather with teachers, with adults. You can have also youth orchestras as guests. That's something we've done many times. Like, you just gather with the teachers for a week or 3 days, and we have specific questions about what we are working on, like pedagogy, even sometimes practical things like instrument maintenance, like instrument care, fundraising, many different topics. But at the same time, you also bring a youth orchestra as a laboratory. You just take that orchestra to just try things out in a very safe place, but at the same time preparing very well the different setup for those activities. I think that's one of the spaces we found. They are very important to, yes, feel, okay, I'm just coming from a very small village, and I'm literally saying small villages outside in the rainforest, or just places you really can't think of a symphony orchestra happening there. And sometimes it's not even a symphony orchestra, because sometimes you have only strings, or even instruments we have a program called pre-orchestra, but actually we combined orff instruments with guitar, with recorders and choir, and they come there as, okay, look, this is what I have to offer to you. This piece has been working very well there because of this and this and that. But at the same time, they can affect the national movement by sharing, let's say, an arrangement that has been, or that will be shared nationally and will be played miles away with the previous experience. Because sometimes we are just trying things out, and we know that we are asked, okay, let's just start working on this piece, and we are just kind of like trying things out. But if we can have this previous experience, when a teacher says, we tried this arrangement, it has this, let's say, pros and cons, then you are not just starting from scratch. So your little program is affecting something bigger than your program. And the second thing to your question, I think it's very important to own your project and your either successes, but at the same time frustrations. So you have to own them, and in that way you can just raise your hand and say, hey, I did this and it was a failure. I found out how to come out of that situation. So because it's just my perception, especially in the American culture, politeness is something that is very well accepted and used. But sometimes that politeness keeps keeps us in a very safe place, so we don't share those frustrations. And it's so good when you share, hey, this is the frustration I have, but this is the way I just overcame it. Do you get that, Katie?
Yeah, definitely.
Was that clear?
I appreciate you. Yeah, I appreciate it. We had a question about how a Nucleo is defined in an El Sistema setting, and Norma, who really could be teaching all of us about all of this, Norma Nunez-Ruch. A Nucleo in El Sistema context is the center or facility in which the students from the community converge to attend lessons, rehearsals, classes, and performances. Would you describe the Nucleos in Colombia differently, or in any other, or would you add anything to that definition?
Can you list again what Norma said?
Yes, it's in the chat box also. A Nucleo in El Sistema context is the center or facility in which the students from the community converge to attend lessons, rehearsals, classes, and performances.
Yes. Yes, definitely. I would add the frustrations, happiness, and all kind of feelings that we have to overcome as a team. And that's something I really I've learned the nucleus are so good at. Not just this place where we just share music, where we also share friendship, but where we really face the biggest frustrations, the biggest challenges, but especially, and I just reinforce this, the way we get out of them. So yes, I think Norma, yes, and I'm so happy she's with us today, because she's been always very proactive on just sharing all those, and that's a very nice description. I just want to add it, yes, besides music and all these social things, the greatest thing is when we face challenges and how do we just overcome them.
I love that addition of the culture. So the Nucleo is a place, but it's also a vibe. It's the way we work together. It's the way we teach. It's the way we interact with one another. I totally agree. There's like a Nucleo onda. Yeah. I would add, in our context and what the class has been thinking about, definitely in the United States, and also from my experience in Venezuela, and I'm guessing in Colombia and in Guatemala, nucleos serve as a collective impact place. So that at your nucleo, for example, I'll just give an example in the United States, you would have food for kids, you would have busing and transportation for ways for the community to get there. It would sometimes serve as a space for elections in the town or a town hall meeting. It would serve as like a parent gathering place just to have dinner and hang out and be a social place, in addition to the student rehearsals going on at the time. And that's this other concept of organizations coming together to work collectively towards a common goal. And I think the Nucleo in El Sistema has in many ways really embodied that collective impact concept.
Yes, I just want to wrap up what you said. I completely agree. With an anecdote, I mean, I've seen many of these, but I was conducting one orchestra in one city called Buenaventura in Colombia. That's one of the biggest ports we have there. And I recall once we were just rehearsing there for a big concert, and that's a tough place to be honest. We had at that point some people shot down the street, and we were rehearsing, and just the people of that neighborhood, they were all the time protecting that space. That Batuta place was the place everyone respected and protected. So even people that were involved in that, they just came there and said, you stay here, you're in a safe place, wait until everything is just fixed there. And maybe they were part of that situation that was happening, and I can't explain the whole story about what happened, because it's cruel, it's very bad. I just want to say people got shot, but it was worse than that. But what I felt when I was there conducting, we were just doing something, and we were just told by these people, hey, you're in a safe place, do not worry. So bad happenings are happening right now, but you're safe. And the kids know that whatever happens in their communities, that's a safe place to be in general.
Yeah.
A safe place to express themselves and say, hey, I don't like this piece we are playing right now, I can't get it, and we have to find out how to solve them. But they feel free to express themselves and say, I like these, I don't like these, and that's something that's some place we have to create all the time, and in small bases, but also in a national basis. And I know how much when we work in a specific program in a very small nucleo, we don't think that would matter or that would really have a big impact in the national basis. But I've seen many times how it could have that big impact.
Thank you so much, Juan Felipe. I'm going to move on to Alvaro and his description of his experience in Sistema in Guatemala. And then also now in the United States, Alvaro is the founder and executive director of Corona Youth Music Project, which is an El Sistema-inspired núcleo in Queens, New York. I want to ask Alvaro, during your presentation, could be at the end, if you would also answer Pedro Perez Conejero's question, which is, would you say that El Sistema is a social program or an educational system?
Can I answer now? Yes, it's a social program. And I can expand on that later, but yeah, it's a social program. So thank you for having me be part of this and to share with all of you. So I am from Guatemala. I started working with El Sistema when El Sistema came to us in Guatemala in 1997. And it started with a group of teachers from Venezuela, from the part of the original founders that you mentioned earlier today, to start an orchestra. And it represented kind of a before and after in the situation of classical music and orchestral education in the country. To give you some a little bit of background, and from what we heard, there's no official recount or documentation of the practices from Venezuela, but we learned that there was two strategies that Maestro Abreu was using to replicate and expand El Sistema to Latin America beginning. One was that he selected or identified local leaders that then would have some kind of training back in Venezuela in conducting, in just learning how things were being done in Venezuela. That was the case in Guatemala, that one person was selected and went to Venezuela and had training in conducting and used to work with this even then in the early or mid 90s, magnificent youth orchestras. So this one person was kind of embedded with all this idea of social change through music and music excellence, and the idea of having an orchestra made of kids that didn't look Caucasian playing that well. It was kind of mind-blowing for us. So all those ideas were embedded into one person. The second strategy was later to send a group of Venezuelan musicians to start an orchestra. As Juan Felipe mentioned earlier, a lot of the success of El Sistema, both in Venezuela and outside, was that the public, that the media and everybody, what they saw was out of the blue, from apparently from nowhere, there was this huge group of kids playing really, really well. And that was one of the best selling points and best fundraising mechanisms for El Sistema, at least in the case of Guatemala. On the other side, in Guatemala, the situation was didn't have a very strong system of orchestral education. There was a youth orchestra, which I was part of, and that was almost defunct when the Venezuelans came. The conservatory had an orchestra course, which sometimes have a small orchestra. Most of the times it didn't have an orchestra. So when the Venezuelans came, they just saw a lot of opportunities because there was a music school, there was kids that were leaving the National Youth Orchestra, there was a military band school, which was training at a high school level. There was a bunch of little private music schools, but there was not an initiative to put all these people playing an orchestral instrument together. So they put together this orchestra, in fact, of 100 kids or so. They played music that nobody thought a group of kids would ever play, no less, even less in 10 days. So I was part of a team that kind of hosted the Venezuelan group of musicians that time in 1997. And we were doing all the little things like raising a few $100s to pay for the hotel and all that. And after the Venezuelans left, they actually came 2 times, 2 years in a row. And after they left, mostly the kids were very engaged, were very interested in following. But the biggest questions for us was what's the best organizational structure? In our case back then, it was not what things can be replicable in Guatemala about this, but it was more like how can we replicate everything that you do? The number one thing was the fundraising piece. Dr. Abreu mentioned that in Venezuela, his first goal was to secure that the government made it a priority that the orchestra would always have state support. And that was kind of our goal, to seek that permanent support, to make it a permanent asset of the state, to have a system of orchestras. But other than that, there was we didn't have any clue of how to come up with a organizational structure. Guatemala just came out of a civil war. So there was a huge influx of funds from international organizations and European and North American governments. But there was no sense of how to go about with it. People in Guatemala, probably to the date, are very suspicious of charities and fundraising schemes. So it was very, very difficult in that way. But what the main thing that actually got replicated was this ethos that we've been talking about, the idea of the orchestra as a gathering point, and most of all, confidence that we didn't have culturally, that things could be done, that music could be done by local youth, and that youth could also train more people locally, that they didn't need to be trained in Europe necessarily, or we didn't need to have a permanent core of foreign musicians. There was also one idea that was very much ingrained, and actually this is the biggest challenge that I want to talk about, that when Abreu started training these local leaders, we got the impression that in a way he was trying to create local Abreus, local Jose Antonio Abreus, specifically in the case of Guatemala. And that represented a big challenge because there's just one Jose Antonio Abreu to begin with. People, as they gained confidence in the work that was being done, started assuming that they could be a better leader than the current leader. So what happened in Guatemala was very interesting. That it probably happened in other countries. Maybe Juan Felipe can add to this if I'm wrong or not. That we started building this kind of pyramid structure in which there was an inspirational leader that was very talented and moving strings everywhere and making things happen. And at the bottom of this pyramid, we have a core of teachers, new teachers, actually the kids that were becoming really, really good teachers. And then somebody came up with the idea that they were going to build a better El Sistema organization. So there was 2 pyramids were overlapping, and everything on the bottom was exactly the same people. And the 2 tops of this pyramid were competing for the same people on the bottom. So it was really interesting. Guatemala, about the time that I left, there was about 4 or 5 initiatives of El Sistema, each with its own leader. Some of them were trying to create their own structure in Guatemala City. Some were trying to create their own structure in the western part of Guatemala. Some of them were trying to support the national movement, but they were at the end they were always competing with for the same human resources on the bottom. And I think that that's one of the biggest risks that many countries had to face. I know from experience that El Salvador had a little bit of the same situation happening, where there was a government-supported organization, and at the same time there was a private foundation doing the same work. However, the things that stayed, again, as I said, you can clearly mark the situation of classical music and music education in Guatemala before El Sistema started in Guatemala and after, and it's years light difference. The bottom line is that there's all this core at the bottom of teachers that are teaching, that are creating more great quality musicians that it was unheard of in Guatemala until then. The ethos that we've been talking about of musical excellence and social change through music, that's been replicated. I think to the date, Guatemala has not created a functional structure that gathers the whole country and all the initiatives so far. But I think it's very positive. At the end, the balance is very positive, because there's actually, if you go to a concert, you hear better music, and there's more concerts going on. There's more people participating actually in doing better music. So regardless of this administration confusion that's still going on, the results are still positive. And also, there's been a huge change in the culture of music education and what can be achieved in Guatemala. Yes. So that's what I can say about the history of Guatemala.
Would you now carry it forward to, with that deep history in Guatemala, now you're working in the United States and went through essentially another period of a training program back in Venezuela, and then like now reinterpreting both your own learning through the Guatemalan experience and with the interaction with the Venezuelans, and then at a later point in life with the Venezuelans again, and then now in the United States?
So I think I've been thinking a lot about this. Many of the challenges that we're facing here in starting a Sistema program are not related to El Sistema. They are related to the red tapes and policies and organizational culture in the US that it's very, very, very different from Latin America. So things that are very easy in Latin America, just like have a kid teach another kid and leave a kid in a classroom teaching the rest of the class, are not applicable here. A couple of things that Juan Felipe mentioned. We were working with a consultant at some point here in New York, and we talked about demanding of the kids to do their best, and the word demand was made this consultant cringe. Like, you don't demand things of a kid. So most of the things that are challenges here in the US are related to that culture that is not musical, that is not about music education or education per se, but it's more about again, policies and educational policies and yeah, the general ethos of idiosyncrasy. Thank you, Norma. Idiosyncrasy. Sorry. And I think that's also the challenge that many friends from Venezuela that are moving here to the US are facing. That it's shocking. It's shocking. We have worked with mostly Hispanic families here in New York City. So on that side, the part from the community, it's really, really accessible. They understand. They are eager to be demanded, or to have their kids demanded to play well, to go out of their way to practice. It doesn't work all the time, but there's a good reception to that kind of culture.
Yeah.
It's mostly our counterparts, the school partnerships, the organization partnerships, government, who are more reluctant and have more red tape, as I said.
Yeah. Do you feel like, and for me, this gets to the question of the visionary leader and sharing this common vision, where in Colombia and in Guatemala, perhaps in Colombia, it sounded from your description, Juan Felipe, that the orchestras were more or less already there, but took like another step forward in coming all together and having a shared purpose and a shared vision, and that you as national director essentially became a visionary leader to unite the country. And then in Guatemala, they were going like this concept, they were even training potential young new visionary leaders to either lead a national system plus lead that nucleo, so at the micro level. I just want to hear a little bit more about if there was a shared vision that could be, and if there was a shared vision, one, in these situations where we're encountering differences of culture and differences of approach and difference in manner and difference of appropriateness, if everyone shared the same vision, does that need a single visionary leader to like champion it and make the path to get everyone on board and lay it out and provide that vision?
Yes, so I think because of the culture specifically of Guatemala, that we are a more what's the word in English? Paternalistic culture, that we need that unified leader to move everybody, or that everybody should follow, even if we don't like them. That's why many countries we have dictators. I think that is very different from the culture of individuality and individual initiative that the US is kind of unique in that way. It was challenging because again, in the case of Guatemala and a little bit the case in El Salvador is that again, rather than when you're not satisfied with the work that is done, rather than collaborating to make it better, you try to replace everything and come up with something new. But that's something that it's I would say, particularly of Guatemala, that's very much part of our culture, and it replicates in politics, in national and local politics, and also in organizations.
I want to echo Alvaro saying that yes, I do think it's culturally. So that we have within Colombia, we have different cultures. We have the Pacific coast with different specific culture, the Caribbean and the mountains. Yes, we have some cities, regions where they're very proactive, and they can even say, hey, we don't want to do the way Bogota is dictating. And even we had the situation where 5 different regions got their own batuta, completely independent. So they were called actually regional batutas, and they still got funds and they run some of the programs that were offered from Bogota, but they decided to deal with their own funds, with their own programs. Even the curriculum was different. So yes, it's cultural. So we had, and they run their own program, but they also were aligned somehow with the national ideas, and it came at some point to some crisis. Great, and I love and I have to be honest, I love frustration. I love the moments when the crisis just arrives, and then you have to find out how to get out of them. So yes, we had at some point some regions saying we want to do this a different way, and some others saying, please tell us how to do it. Especially South Colombia, please, and I have to be clear on this. Yes, Colombia had some initiatives happening before El Sistema arrived there, before Batuta started, especially in the biggest city, major cities. But what started only when Batuta started was the new orchestras in very remote places in the rainforest, or places where it just not even wind bands happened, but just folks music was happening, and at that point when Batuta started, they started some symphonic movement that wouldn't happen if Batuta wouldn't start. So we have, let's say, first gather all different initiatives, and as said, Batuta might have over, I mean, around 5,000 students, sorry, 50,000 students, 60,000 students, but the other programs aligned with Batuta makes it bigger than 120,000 or 150,000. So we are saying with these that even Batuta is still a place to be aligned with or to take opportunities from. There are some other projects that are not called Batuta that share the same core values with Batuta. They are called part of El Sistema in Batuta, but they can be called a different way, and especially networks. That's something that has worked a lot in Colombia, like networks. The network of orchestras in Medellin, the network of orchestras in Pasto, in different cities where they have networks of different programs that are, they don't have even a name. They keep their own names, but they gather for side-by-side orchestras, teacher seminarios, big opportunities like something big is happening during that month, so they gather to specific projects.
Great. Thank you for that. We're going to move on to how El Sistema came into the United States. Jose Pedro, could you share my screen again?
There, you should have received a notification.
Got it. Okay.
Right.
So you've heard now how El Sistema began in Venezuela, how it has expanded across the Americas, and we have already gotten a little bit into the difference of how El Sistema began in the United States. Some of the earliest El Sistema inspired programs, and just like in Colombia, of course, in the United States, there were a number of classical music and youth orchestras and choirs and bands and very Sistema-looking ensembles that had at their core mission social change and diversity and offering kids and families opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have without this program partner. And they were not affiliated with El Sistema or claimed to be inspired by El Sistema, but were very active in the United States before many organizations had heard of El Sistema. However, when Maestro Abreu really began to be featured in major international publications, the 60 Minutes special was a huge one for citizens in the United States. This is a news hour broadcast that offers stories of innovative thinkers and big movers and shakers worldwide. And there was an hour-long piece that aired nationally that many hundreds of thousands of people have seen and have taken it as their inspiration to either start an El Sistema inspired program or to begin aligning their current programming activities to be more Sistema-like. So as Alvaro was describing, what the United States is going through are essentially 150 plus passionate individuals, passionate people who in a very American way took up by their bootstraps, started an organization completely on their own, with no affiliation or association with anyone else in their communities, and have started these El Sistema inspired programs and have said that they share the principles of El Sistema in Venezuela, and that they want to be connected to the larger and global El Sistema movement. So those organizations include a myriad of programs, people, companies, ranging from the incredibly successful and well-supported Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles and Gustavo Dudamel, all the way to the young musicians of Alamance, which is in Alamance County in North Carolina, where there are 15 children in a church, and it's 2 teacher volunteers and a woman who's building a board of directors in order to build the organization. And she has created a curriculum and put instruments in the hands of these kids, and they meet 5 times a week. And they are all kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch in the United States, which means that they meet 150% of the federal poverty guideline in the US. That line means that your family of 4 is making about $30,000 to support your family. You have a joint income of about $30,000. So the range is wide, and these individual programs got started, began rehearsals, began recruitment, tried to follow the literature and the documentaries and the research and the articles being put out about what is El Sistema and what does being in an El Sistema inspired program mean, and what are you doing that works for you, and what is it that they're beginning to prove works in Venezuela and in other countries, and what aspects of programming and organization design lead to those results. And so all of these El Sistema inspired programs began to talk to one another in a very kind of grassroots way, led by some of the Abreu Fellows that came out of the New England Conservatory Fellowship that Alvaro and I participated in. Namely, among them was Stanford Thompson. He was the founding board chair of El Sistema USA, and also Mark Churchill. And I have to say, before Stanford, Mark Churchill is really a major leader and a huge part of El Sistema's history in coming to the United States. Mark did research in Venezuela and began bringing youth orchestras from the New England Conservatory to Venezuela in the 1980s. So really early in the El Sistema growth in Venezuela, did Mark start to get involved and then begin bringing knowledge of this incredible program to the United States and helping Venezuela tell its story worldwide. So in thinking about how could all of these programs, so we have 120 El Sistema inspired organizations in the United States. Much like in Colombia, as Juan Felipe described, not all of those 120 are members of El Sistema USA, but we began a discussion with a concerted group of people to begin formulating what would be the principles of an association that could bring us all together. What could we all agree on? And what are we all measuring? And what are we all making sure are core components of our program in order to have the same results that they have had in Venezuela, and in order to have a set of results that we want to accomplish in the United States? And through surveys, through focus groups, through conferences, through our most recent census and data research supported by Duke University, which I'll tell you more about, we came up with these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 principles. And they are very similar to the guiding principles I described at the top of the presentation, in that you're central to the mission of the organization is that you're committed to music as a vehicle for social change, and you're working in a partnership environment where partners provide expertise in music and community and youth development, that you're looking at an intensity of practice in order for our association to codify our tent, to essentially define how will we be most productive in working with one another in El Sistema USA, and what programs, what should be an aspirational amount of intensity. Through our research, we have determined 5 hours of music instruction per week, a minimum, that we serve children with financial access barriers to high quality music programs, and that they are provided always in a way that provides equal access to all kids. So in providing classes, kids have to have a way to get there, and the El Sistema program is obligated to make sure that there is a pathway for students to participate. That the ensemble is a major core part of the curriculum, that the way that we teach is through the ensemble and in an ensemble fashion. That the nuclear environment is core to where we provide rehearsals, and that onda, that vibe, is the instructors build loving and mentoring relationships. Culture is characterized by student-driven activities, that's that ambition part, and youth voice. That we're looking for a high quality of excellence, both in the performance that we described and also in the way that we teach. So it's outcomes-based. That, again, this is not just for fun, but it is the fun and growth comes in having high standards of accomplishment. That it's community-based, so that parents are very involved and the community is engaged in the way that we provide activities in the El Sistema program. And that programs serve a minimum of 3 years, serve kids a minimum of 3 years. So it's while aspirationally we're looking at like pre-kindergarten, age 4, all the way through post-secondary education, so that you're looking at high school, so 18, 19, 20 years old in the United States. But at a minimum, you're looking at least 3 years of progressive learning. The vision for El Sistema USA, we have, from our early gatherings in deciding, okay, these are going to be the principles that will unite us. From that, and when I say we, I really mean like all 120 leaders of all of these programs participating in open conference calls like this, in mass email chains, in surveys that one leader would put forward and everybody would fill it out and give their opinion, through years, like 4 years of an iterative process. El Sistema USA became a 501c3 charity organization in the United States and has established itself as a membership association, so that in order to be part of El Sistema USA, if you want to be part of the El Sistema USA umbrella, you agree that your program will adhere to these principles, and that you want to buy in and invest in the larger national U.S. movement. The vision for the U.S. movement is that we're looking to have the national recognition of El Sistema as a validated model for youth empowerment and development. So that really is that educational, or is it an educational program or a social program? We're looking for El Sistema to be looked to nationally as a key youth empowerment and youth development program. So I would say that that's a social program that uses an educational system to accomplish its youth development outcomes. That we grow in our membership, that we're serving 100,000 children from every state in the country, that we want to be looked to as a national advocate of music education as a tool for youth empowerment. So not just in El Sistema programs, but in our public school systems. And that we're also more strongly connected to the broader global movement of El Sistema. Our priorities for 2020, I love this, that our board would not let this go, but it is number one, to accomplish social change in America through supporting members of El Sistema USA, through achieving some of these youth development outcomes. And I struggled with that as the executive director, because I was like, what are we gonna do to change? Like, how can that be our strategic priority by 2020? What are we gonna measure? What can we organizationally put in place to say that we have accomplished that goal? And there are some things that we can do. So I'm thrilled that is still our number one priority. To measure and tell the story of the collective impact of the movement through research and data analysis, to be that hub where all of the information about everything that's working well or not working is collected and analyzed. to provide professional learning, much of what Juan Felipe and Alvaro described, supporting teachers, supporting administrators, supporting kids, through joint performances, conferences, workshops, sharing best practices, to increase awareness of El Sistema USA and El Sistema as a movement, to grow our own membership for greater collective power, and to add new El Sistema inspired programs, so to proliferate new programs in the US, to improve funding for all of our members, and then also to improve music education in public school systems. The big update for El Sistema USA, some of you know by now our relationship with Duke University. So we are hosted and headquartered at one of the leading public universities in the country. They provide about 10% of our operating budget in-kind gifts, which include space, faculty support from Duke faculty. They manage our census, and they continue to do national impact studies on behalf of El Sistema USA. They also are hosting our national conference, which I would love for any of you to attend. It is January 19th and 20th at Duke University. So that is how we came to, let's see, escape. Great. That's how El Sistema came to be in the United States. And there have been some good questions in the chat box here. Oh, you will all be in Chile then. That is a huge bummer. I wish I could be in both places. How does El Sistema USA define social change? So in the United States, there are in youth development movements, there are some specific indicators that are being looked to by a number of major systems. So one specific indicator is high school graduation rate. Are your kids graduating from high school? Another is in the 3rd grade in the United States, which is when you're about 8 years old. Much in terms of social programs are what social programs will be offered and what kids will need for later on in life. Much of what determines that is their reading score, whether or not they're literate by 8 or 9 years old in the United States. Others include active employment. So our youth, in youth development especially, our youth going on into jobs that provide opportunities for advancement and learning. So are they in a job that allows them to gain a new skill, learn from that skill, get promoted in that job, or transfer that skill to another job in the future? Are they in what in the States is defined as productive or a learning environment, work environment? Another is growth mindset. So are students learning the ability to learn? Are they able to take information? And this is measured through academic standards and also through social evaluations, so literal like tests that you can conduct to understand whether or not a child is processing information and then is able to apply that knowledge to different circumstances in which they would have to shift the skill that they learned and apply it in a different way, in a different setting, to a new concept, which is essentially learning. Yes, when I say buy-in, I do mean that in order to be a member of El Sistema USA, there is a membership dues. At the moment, through our application process, that dues or fee can be waived. And so it is, if you are in a position or your organization is in a position where you're very early in your growth and you're not able to afford the dues payment, then you describe that, and El Sistema USA grants a fee waiver to any organization that requests a fee waiver with documentation about why they want a fee waiver. But the reason to have a fee is that El Sistema USA is a charity, and all of the professional development and resources and gatherings and conferences and student learning opportunities and seminarios and nucleo support and fundraising support and webinars, and even my participation in this video conference is all supported by a private organization, El Sistema USA. And without support, we would not be able to ensure the sustainability of all of the El Sistema inspired nucleos across the country. So we ask both every nucleo to contribute to keeping one another advancing in their learning and in development, and also essentially to support your own learning through offering a contribution to receive services towards your own professional development. It is not a worldwide kind of rule, no. I would say it's a really different, it's a different setting. Yeah, Norma, yay. Jump in, please. I'd love to get out of the text box questions. Go ahead. We can't hear you, Norma. Great.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify one thing in regard to the whole El Sistema as a brand or El Sistema as a global organization. Even though we value all of those initiatives that seeks to unify all of these ideas for you to be an El Sistema program. And this is a dichotomy that Maestra Abreu has been pointing out since the beginning of the initiative. This is a system that is not a system in itself. So even though there are initiatives, international initiatives that are trying to bring together all of these programs under the same umbrella, it does not mean that there not exist other programs that are called or that are being branded itself as El Sistema that are not under this particular umbrella, not only in the United States, but also globally. So it is not mandatory for you to be part of this particular umbrella. It does have its perks, and it does have its benefits, but it's not a limitation for you to be using the banner or the name El Sistema. Maestro Abreu has always been very, very particular in that, to the point that he's very uncomfortable with this global movement being called El Sistema, because he feels that it makes it a little exclusive, and for him it's all about inclusion. But this is something that I feel that is very, very important to highlight too.
It's an excellent point, and I think El Sistema USA and other umbrella organizations have to prove their worth. So it is 100% on my shoulders and on the shoulders of the board that if we are charging people for membership and saying that we want to, collect money on behalf of a U.S. Sistema movement, that we better be offering something, that we better have a return on that investment to improving our members. So I see that as our total mandate, and it'll be a big part of our mission. And I want to bring more people into El Sistema USA in the United States. But in order to do that, I better have something good to offer.
Hi, Katie, could I jump in?
Please.
Okay, in your experience, Alvaro, Juan, Katie, did you ever experience any backlash for using classical music within your El Sistema orchestras? Because it's a big issue here in Jamaica, where they see it that we're teaching classical music to try and whitewash the kids.
It's a big question. I would say my personal experience, I founded a group in North Carolina called Kids Notes. We started in kindergarten with every kid. So we didn't start at all the different levels. All the kids were in kindergarten.
Right.
So because we started so young, there wasn't a backlash.
Okay.
And then we incorporated all kinds of music from the beginning, but certainly used the fundamentals of a classical approach to teaching classical instruments.
Right.
Yes, but I have, Kids Notes did not have that experience, but yes, it is a big part of the debate in the United States about what kind of music should we be including in a national repertoire or in national resources. I would share that amongst ourselves, amongst nucleos in the US, a lot of the repertoire that we share is not classical. It is for orchestras, but it's modern music, or it's arrangements of hip hop, or it's arrangements of bluegrass or African music. Yeah, Alberto, please.
Yeah, so in particular in Corona, I'm working with mostly Mexican and Ecuadorian families. Actually, it's been the opposite. I have my background in classical music as well, and my education in classical music. So that's the first thing that I introduced. Then I started hearing other programs here locally in the city, using arrangements of popular music and folk music and all that. So I brought the question, and also, sorry, I heard programs asking the kids or giving them a choice for one piece. What kind of piece do you want to play? And so I brought that idea to the program, suggesting popular music and everything, and hands down all the kids prefer classical music. I think the reason and one part is that our Latin American music still very much informed by European forms, the folk music of our countries, to the point that there's mariachi and all the folk music in South America include European instruments still. So it's very much influenced by that. So there's a kind of direct connection between that local music and the European tradition.
Great, thanks, Alvaro. Just in the last, we only have 4 more minutes, and I wanted to give Sophie and Safira a chance to ask a question. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
Sophie, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I had sort of 2 questions, but they're kind of linked, so I'll try and make it brief. I just wanted to know anyone's experience of whether any kids or families connected to El Sistema programs have ever felt sort of patronized by what anyone's been trying to do, and once that's been sort of gotten over, that hurdle, whether there's been any issues with kids not remaining motivated. Because it's such an amazing program, but surely there must be some kids who kind of fall through the net, and I haven't heard about any of these kids, and if that hasn't happened, I'd love to know why, because that's
Juan Felipe, I'd love for you. Yeah, Juan Felipe.
Sure, yeah, no, just getting back on the last question, I submitted actually 2 documents, and one of them includes some stories about how the orchestra started in South America with all the priests just starting string orchestras combined with like folklorical instruments. So just regarding the last question, so if you want to just go there, so I just submitted 2 documents that are that have been uploaded. So if you just want to see a little bit more about how much there's been not just much a pushback to play classical music, but actually a desire to include the folklorical instruments or just regional musics, regional rhythms. And just to your question, Sophie, yes, I think I've seen all of them, but I've seen also students not so motivated, and as well as parents or teachers or conductors or funders. But I think motivation usually comes from being hands-on in a daily basis. If we are not hands-on, if the teachers don't have the opportunity to voice their concerns, to voice also their desires, or if the kids are not included in some part in the whole process, but they're just like kids coming to be served, or if the conductors are only conducting but not participating in the different moments, then you can have people not motivated. So you know what I mean? So I think motivation is always something that comes if you are hands-on things. But if you can't voice yourself, if you can't really participate that, and this is something that I have to do every rehearsal, and it takes me a lot of time to convince teachers, hey, you can just raise your hand and say, Maestro, I really want to voice something. If we just do this in a way that affects the whole orchestra, we are just working on articulation. So if I can just give my point of view about this articulation, it affects the whole orchestra. But from the point of view of a teacher, you have to just wait until the conductor is done, and then you can just voice that maybe in the hall. But the way we do that in the El Sistema programs is it's a faculty thing. is not a vertical thing, it's a horizontal thing, and the conductor is only one of the teachers. So yes, if you have the conductor being one of the teachers feel, okay, this is one of us, and then everyone feels motivated. But yes, I've seen so many times people unmotivated, from kids to teachers or even board members. So as much as we can just feel that it's horizontal, it's going to be fine.
Thank you. Safira, I want to give you a chance to ask your question and then we'll be done.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Safira.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm in Greece at the moment, in Athens, and I know that Sistema Greece, which started like a year ago, it works with refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and the differences are very big from like the cultural difference here in the Sistema Greece in respect to Venezuela. Or so how do you actually assess all these sociological differences? Do you do it from the beginning, like with professionals or something, and sit down and think and theorize it, and then start working to palliate the needs of the place where you're going to start the Sistema, or is it in the journey?
Yeah, I'll try. So I would say both, definitely. And Alvaro would love, we just have 1 minute, so 30 seconds.
So yes, very quickly. I think as Felipe mentioned earlier, I think the main thing, the first thing is to show results, to have the kids show that they can play, that can play very good. And then in the process of doing that, you're going to come up with all these challenges that you have to solve one by one, and find the solutions that apply to your particular culture and location. But never lose sight that the goal is to have the kids play and play as good as they can.
10 seconds just to say that, yeah, it comes from the need. I think I agree with you. It comes from the need. And just a tiny example. I was conducting 2 years ago the El Sistema Japan, where you might think, why? So you don't need an El Sistema in Japan where the music education is so great. But they had this bad situation in Fukushima when the nuclear reactor exploded. You remember that, like 4 or 5 years ago. So that was the need. Those kids are serving an El Sistema program in Japan, and in a way I haven't seen in many other places where you have real needs. So they had the need in Japan. When this situation happened, families were separated. What should we do is to have these kids working on something like really hands-on every day. How about El Sistema? And that works so nicely in Japan as nowhere else. So just to give that tiny example, as yes, it comes from the need.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you for your great questions. What a wonderful participatory class. Thank you so much, Alvaro and Juan Felipe. It was a real pleasure to spend time with you tonight talking about this and bring back lots of good memories. For the global leaders, I just want to remind you that we have an assignment. And if you have any questions, feel free to write me or Jose Pedro. But hopefully by now you have already chosen or contacted a leader, founder, or CEO of one of your locally socially motivated music education projects. And in 800 to 1,000 words, you need to write an essay about how the design of your chosen project engaged the community and listened to community needs. And what I'm really getting at is an exploration in this interview of, was it a moment where someone just got really excited and boom, came in and started this thing and said, hey, everybody, you should come join my own project and be part of this, and I want to do this, and I want to provide all these materials, and I'm excited about this? Or was there a period of debate and trial and error and engagement with community leaders and a real assessment of community need to decide that this is the project that would really best suit that need, best meet that need. So some of the questions are designed to help you have that conversation, and I look forward to reading your essays. Thank you so much, everyone, for a great conversation tonight. Take care wherever you are, and have a great night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
And thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining, Alvaro and Juan Felipe.
Okay, bye, guys.